القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ولعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله نعم الوكيل نعم المولى ونعم النصير. I'd like to extend my congratulations to all the believers on this very auspicious occasion that we are celebrating tonight, which is the Mawlid, the Wiladah of our fourth Imam, Imam Sayyid al-Abidin alayhi salam. Imam Sajjad was born on the 5th of Shaban in the year 38 after Hijri in the city of Medina. His father is Abu Abdullah Husayn and his mother is Shaban. Imam Sajjad was born, and for 2 years he was also under the Imam of Imam Ali. Imam Ali was alive for about 2 years before his martyrdom, and 40 after Hijri. So Imam Zain al-Abidin is growing in a house with this noble lady as his mother, Shaban, and with the presence of his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. When we look at the life and the times of Imam Zain al-Abidin, we see that Imam's life coincides with some of the most vile rulers and leaders in Islamic history. We know that Imam is living at a time which is very hostile towards the Ahlul Bayt. We know that the events of Karbala happened, and the Ahlul Bayt, they're under a state of siege. They're considered to be, in one form or another, enemies of the state, because Imam Husayn led this uprising, this atrocity, this massacre happened. And so there's a lot of tension which is in that community at that time. Imam at the same time, he's under a lot of restriction. There are times in his life where Imam wasn't allowed to have any gatherings in his home. Imam is not allowed to, for example, recite Jummah prayer. Imam is not allowed to even have Jama'at prayer. Large congregations, large assemblies at his home were forbidden. Only a few number of people could come and sit down and talk with the Imam. Imam is under constant surveillance. People, spies are being sent to his home to see what is he saying, what are his political views, is he speaking out against Bani Umayyah, Bani Marwan, right? And so Imam is growing, is living in a time which is quite hostile. Along with these things, Bani Marwan, who was there, the Khalifa at the time, was someone by the name of Marwan. And Marwan had become the ruler, he had come to Medina, and he began to change the entire culture of the city of Medina. Unlike the previous ruler Yazid, Marwan, he had a different strategy in how to deal with the Ahlul Bayt, and how to deal with the Muslims. We know that Bani Umayyah, that Abu Sufyan and Muawiyah, that they became Muslims at the final hour, 11th hour. They became Muslims. And they became Muslims because they didn't have any other outlet, they didn't have any other solution. To a certain extent, they accepted Islam because they knew that there was no other alternative. And so their Islam was not something which was accepted with their hearts. It was out of convenience for them. And that's why we have other traditions that say that the other companions used to look down at Abu Sufyan and Muawiyah because they accepted Islam out of, not willingly, but out of a way in which they can live a little easier in the community. Marwan, when he became the leader, what he wanted to do was he wanted to, destroy Islam, but he chose a different strategy. Instead of going and attacking the Ahlul Bayt, what he wanted to do was he wanted to bring out this culture of fisq. He wanted to bring this culture of immorality and indecency. So Marwan, as the Muslim Ummah expanded, there was a lot of taxes, there was a lot of revenue coming in Bayt al-Mal, the treasury, and there was a lot of wealth that he had access to. And so Marwan's strategy was to go and corrupt the city of Makkah and Medina. And because the people were at relatively financial ease, what he had done, what Marwan had done, was that he had made Makkah and Medina centers of fisq and fujur. Meaning in Medina, in Makkah, in the city of the Prophet, in the birthplace of Islam, you will find things which are completely unbelievable. You will find the people who are openly dancing. You will find alcohol on the streets. You will find mixed gatherings. Some of the worst events, some of the worst type of things that could happen in Islam, we find that immediately after the events of Karbala, that these things started taking place. Alcohol was widespread. It wasn't even hidden in the city of Medina, in the city of Makkah, right? It was prevalent everywhere you could go, and everybody was engaging in it. You know, during that time there was a book which was written, Kitab al-Aghani, you know, the book of music, and it's a very large piece of work of where, you know, the author of al-Faraj al-Isfahani, he composed these lyrics and music, and he wrote this very large book. He would say that in the city of Medina, that music was so prevalent, haram music, obviously, you know, we're talking about haram music, that music was so prevalent. Every single person was engaged in Muslim. Every single person among the Muslims was engaged in music. It became so prevalent that not even a scholar would speak out against it. Not even a learned person would speak out against it. Not a learned person, nor even the one who is a worshipper. And Medina, the city of Medina, had become the city of women dancers and women singers. This is immediately after the events of Karbala. This isn't very long after the events of Karbala, after the Prophet's death, right? And this is one of the strategies that Shaitan uses. One of the strategies that Shaitan uses to make certain haram things seem more legitimate is to make it rampant, is to make it readily available everywhere. So what happens? So we don't feel hostile towards it, right? An example in our society is, for example, interest. We have interest everywhere we go. Bank account, mortgage, auto loan, everywhere. And interest is made everywhere where no longer it doesn't feel as bad. Why? Because it's rampant, it's prevalent everywhere. It's important that we realize in our hearts that these are wrong things, but we don't have any other solution. We should never become complacent to these type of things. And so Marwan, his strategy was this: make Medina, make Makkah, make these important centers of Islamic belief and theology and religion, make it as corrupt as possible. And he was quite successful in it. People, they would come to Medina not for spiritual rejuvenation. Whenever we want some type of spiritual rejuvenation, we'll go to Ziyarah, we'll go to Medina, we'll go to Makkah, we'll go to the Kaaba, we'll do Umrah. At the time of Marwan, at the time of Imam Sayyid, people, they used to go to Makkah and Medina for entertainment, for leisure, for listening to these singers and attending these concerts. That's how things have changed so quickly. At the same time, we find that Marwan, what they started doing was they started pulling people away from that debate. During this time, this masjid was constructed, called Masjid Sabbi Ali. The masjid for cursing Imam Ali. And then they began concocting these false hadith about Bani Umayyah, Bani Marwan. And so Imam, he lived in this type of environment. And we see what has happened is that the cancer of Bani Umayyah, now it has metastasized. Now it's gone to the very roots of Islam. And so the question is, what should Imam do in this type of situation? Imam is in a very hostile environment, considered to be, in one sense, fugitives and outlaws. They're at the very fringe of society. Imam is the leader, Imam is the guide. So what should his responsibility be? He cannot neglect his responsibility. He cannot become a recluse. He cannot withdraw from society. And so what Imam did during this time was he took a very soft approach and to what some people would call a band-aid approach, which at the time it doesn't seem as if Imam is doing much, but Imam is looking at the long term. He's planting seeds that a few decades later, that those seeds will begin to sprout up. So what is he doing? Imam, there's a couple of contributions that he's had during this time. Now, now you understand the environment of Medina. There's music, there's dancing, there's alcohol, there's fisq and fujur, rampant and prevalent everywhere, right? Not only that, Imam is also under pressure. Imam doesn't have the freedom to do things that he wants to do. He cannot go out openly and preach because of the pressures from the government. So what are some of the things that Imam did during this time period? The first thing that Imam did during this period was that he emphasized the recitation of the Quran. And this is something very important. Because Imam, he realized that after the Prophet's death, that the Prophet said, "Inni tarikum fikum al-thaqalayn kitab Allah wa itrati." He said, the people noticed that the Prophet is saying, after I leave this world, I'm leaving behind you two weighty things, the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. They've neglected the Ahlul Bayt. They're not giving allegiance to the Ahlul Bayt. They're not supporting to the Ahlul Bayt. So then if they cannot support the Ahlul Bayt, then they should at least hold on to the Quran. So Imam, what he did, he emphasized recitation of the Quran. Whenever he had any gathering, he would tell the people to recite the Quran. In Bani Marwan, they couldn't take a stand against Imam because what was he saying? He wasn't calling anybody towards him. He's telling the people to come to the Quran. Imam, he realized that in Medina, the people, the citizens, they had this sickness within their hearts. They were addicted to music. They were addicted to these things which will cause them to go towards more lewdness and more polluted activities. The Imam knows the solution for this is what? Is recitation of the Quran. Imam knows that music is something which is so addictive. One of the things that happens is that when you start listening to music, it becomes more and more addictive. And music is more so about culture. It puts certain thoughts in our minds. It creates certain types of feelings and certain types of sentiments. And the content which is coming is obviously corrupted. So the Imam knows in order to get them out of this state, the solution is what? Is the Quran. When the Quran is recited in a melodious manner, in a harmonious manner. And what happens is that people's heart is now going to be attracted to the Quran. He was calling the people to recitation of the Quran because he wanted the people to understand that fill your minds with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't fill your minds with the words of mankind. And so Imam Sajjad during this time period, he himself took some steps in order to build this culture of the Quran, build this culture of recitation of the Quran. And there's a hadith which is narrated in Usul al-Kafi where Imam Sajjad, that he used to, in his home, he used to recite the Quran so loudly and so beautifully that people, when they used to pass the house of the Imam, they used to stop and they used to listen to the Imam reciting the Quran. Imam used to say that the Quran is what you should be holding on to. Why are you listening to these musicians, these singers, and these other people when you have the Quran which is in front of you? That was the first important thing that Imam did. He emphasized the Quran. And that's something which is relevant to us. We as lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, we as Muslims, we have to give proper attachment to the Quran. One of the things that is so beautiful is when a young person gets up and begins to read the Quran with tajweed, with the proper qira'ah, with the proper recitation. These are things that we need to start from a young age. These are things that we need to instill within our youth, so as they grow older, they have this attachment to the Quran. And that's why learning the Arabic language is so important. Whenever I go, wherever I go, I always emphasize learn the Arabic language. Because the Arabic language will expand your mind. And you will really be able to appreciate the Quran when you learn Arabic. Okay. The second thing that the Imam did was that Imam, he gave them another outlet. Right? They're going to these concerts, they're going to these gatherings with his singers and dancers. Instead of going this, Imam gives them another outlet. And what was that outlet? He gave them Sayyid al-Sajjadiyah. He gave them this book filled with beautiful du'as, beautiful prayers, and beautiful supplications, which teach a person how to talk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how to communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead of going to these gatherings and filling our minds with polluted ideas, with wrong ideas, turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam, what does he do? He gives them an alternative. This dua, this book of du'as, which is filled with some of the most beautiful recitations and the most elegant du'as. The people at the time, in order for them to get their needs fulfilled, they used to turn to the Khalifa, to the ruler of the time. They used to turn to Ali Marwan for their financial needs. So for them, Allah had basically disappeared from their worldview. The way that they would get money was that they would get stipends from the government. And if they needed something more, they would go to the Khalifa, right? They would go to the ruler, to the leader of the time, and they would go and request. Now the entire concept of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's completely gone. Some of these scholars, they say Hasan al-Basri, one of the scholars, prominent scholars, he would say Medina had become so bad that if the Prophet was to come alive at this moment, he would know nothing of the city of Medina. Meaning the only thing that people were doing was that they would know where the Qibla is. Beyond the Qibla, the people had no idea. Hasan al-Basri, he says that people, they stopped praying. The vast majority of the Muslims became tariq as-salah. They abandoned prayers. They left prayers. If Prophet was to be resurrected at this moment, he would not recognize this as Madina's Rasul, the city of the Prophet. And so the situation had gone so bad. So what is Imam doing? Imam is trying to revive the spirit of turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam, instead of people going and listening to this haram poetry and to this haram music, Imam himself composes these beautiful masterpieces where he's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, one of the beautiful poetry which the Imam here recites, he says, نَامَتِ الْعُيُونُ وَغَارَتِ النُّجُومُ وَأَنْتَ الْمَلِكُ الْحَيُّ الْقَيُّومُ. He says that نَامَتِ الْعُيُونُ, that at nighttime all the eyes have closed, they've gone to sleep. وَغَارَتِ النُّجُومُ, and the stars have come out. وَأَنْتَ الْمَلِكُ الْحَيُّ الْقَيُّومُ. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't go to sleep. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's alive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need rest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qayyum, He's self-subsisting. غَلَّقَتِ الْمُلُوكَ أَبْوَابَهَا وَأَقَامَتْ عَلَيْهَا حُرَّاسُهَا. He says that the kings and the rulers, they've gone and they've closed their doors. At nighttime, we can't go to their palaces. We cannot go and ask them for anything. وَأَقَامَتْ عَلَيْهِ حُرَّاسُهَا. And the guards have come and they're protecting the doors. And then, what is he now? He's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَبَابُكَ مَفْتُوحٌ لِلسَّائِلِينَ. He says, oh Allah, but your door is always open to those people who need something. We don't have to go to anybody to make our request. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's door is always open. جِئْتُكَ لِتَنْظُرْ إِلَيَّ بِرَحْمَتِكَ يَا أَرْحَمَ الرَّاحِمِينَ. In the middle of the night, the Imam is saying, I come to you so that you can look at me, so you can glance me with your mercy. Ya Arham Ar-Rahim, oh the most merciful. So what is the Imam doing? Imam, on a very passive level, in a very indirect level, what is he trying to do? He's trying to bring the attention of the masses. He's trying to bring the attention of the Muslim community back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is one of his greatest contributions, that he revived this entire spirit of dua and supplication. Had Imam not done this, we don't know what would have happened to the Muslim Ummah. Because the number of social ills, the number of vices, and the amount of debauchery which was there in Medina and Makkah, people they were going on a trajectory which was far away from Islam. And so Imam, he didn't have the ability to lecture, to have large gatherings. So he chose this way, by giving them this important book, this important masterpiece, Sayyid Sajjad. Brothers and sisters, these books that we have in dua, especially Sayyid Sajjad, this really is one of the gems of Ahlul Bayt, the Zabur of Ali Muhammad. It's really a masterpiece. If you go and you read it, and you go and you reflect over it, it's something that can completely change your life. One of our scholars, Sayyid Marashi Najafi, he sent a copy of Sayyid Sajjad to Al-Azhar University. At that time, the principal was somebody by the name of Sheikh Al-Tantawi. And when Sheikh Tantawi received the book of Sayyid Sajjad, he wrote a letter back to Ayatollah Marashi Najafi. And in this letter, he says something really, really interesting. He says, وَلَسُوءِ حَظِّنَا. He said, how unfortunate we are that we were deprived of this book. And he speaks about himself. He's like, I feel so unhappy that so late in my life was I able to read this book. This book is one of the most valuable books I've read. وَكُنْتُ كُلَّمَا أَنْظُرْ فِيهَا أَرَاءَ فَوْقَ الْكَلَامِ الْمَخْلُوقِ وَدُونَ كَلَامِ الْخَالِقِ. He said, as much as I look at this book, I see that this book, its contents, it's superior to the content of humans, of mankind, but it's lowered in the words of the Creator. This is how we have to recognize Ahlul Bayt, and this is how we also have to introduce others to the school of Ahlul Bayt. The greatest heritage, brothers and sisters, the greatest legacy of Ahlul Bayt is in their ma'arif, is in their teachings, is in their instructions, is in their books of dua. They teach us how to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They teach us what type of relationship that we should have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam, what does he do? He undertakes this responsibility of reviving this spirit of dua, the spirit of turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam, he planted these seeds in them. And we see in the next decades to follow, we see the fruits of that. Just a few words about these du'as. You know, when we open up our books of du'as, we see that there's so many du'as. Sometimes, you know, I myself, I open up Fatul Jinan, and there's so many du'as for us to recite. That a person says, which one should I do? Which one should I recite? Is a dua for the 9th hour, the 10th hour, the 11th hour? And one of the scholars, he says so beautifully, he says these du'as are like a pharmacy. When you go to the pharmacy, you go and you pick the dua that you need. So go and pick these du'as, read these du'as which you feel they mesh with you, which feel that they match with your personality. You don't always have to go to dua just because you need something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Sometimes these du'as are like vitamins. They're like supplements. Even if, of course, when we're in a state of difficulty, when we're in a state of trial and hardship, our first action should be to turn to these du'as. But even if we're not in difficulty, these du'as should be constantly recited by us. And these du'as, they contain some gems, some very powerful gems of spirituality. Those who go and are able to read some of these du'as, their hearts will be completely awakened with the content which is in these du'as. Because these are the words of a ma'soom. These du'as, one of the reasons why they're so powerful is that when we have ahadith, right, those ahadith which come to us, Imam is talking to the general public. So when Imam is talking to the general public, he's talking to them at a level they can understand. But in these du'as, who is the Imam talking to? The Imam is talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the content and the depth is far much greater than what these normal ahadith are there. The meanings and the depth of these words are far greater. There's a beautiful example in this munajat al-arifin. At the end of Sayyid Sajjad, there's 15 munajat. And these are some of the most beautiful munajat that you can find. And I want you to pay attention to these words and see the literary expertise of the Imam. He says, إِلَهِ فَاجْعَلْنَا مِنَ الَّذِينَ تَلَسَّخَتْ أَشْجَارُ الشَّوْقِ إِلَيْكَ فِي هَدَائِكِ صُدُورِهِمْ. Imam, he invokes this beautiful imagery so that we can understand what is true dhikr, what is true dua, what is true supplication and prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam, he says, our hearts are like gardens. And in these gardens, there are trees. And what are those trees doing? Those trees are moving back and forth. Right? They're moving back and forth for what? They're moving back and forth in anticipation for Allah's dhikr, for Allah's remembrance. You know, sometimes maybe you've seen that before a rainstorm happens, it becomes dark, and the trees, what do? The trees, they move back and forth. The branches, they shake, right? They're anticipating what? The rain is going to come down, and it's going to rejuvenate them. Imam is saying the same thing. Our hearts are like this. Our hearts are aching and longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're moving back and forth, waiting for the dhikr, waiting for the rain of Allah's remembrance to come down. Imam, what is he saying? Imam is saying, plant these trees into our hearts. Put these trees into our hearts that always yearn for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That always long for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make those trees in our hearts always doing the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That rain, Imam is drawing a beautiful metaphor, that rain is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when that rainfall comes onto those trees, what does it do? It brings life to those trees. Just like our hearts, how does life come into our heart? By doing the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi. And this is the highest form of dhikr. You know, we have three different forms of dhikr. For the first form of dhikr is dhikr lisan, the dhikr that comes from the tongue. So we're saying, Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, La ilaha illallah. We're saying the dhikr. Where is it coming from? It's coming from our tongue. Then there's another form of dhikr. What is that form of dhikr? The dhikr amali. For example, we're reciting the Quran, we're reciting salat. All of those are forms of dhikr. But there's a third form of dhikr. What is that form of dhikr? The dhikr qalbi. When our hearts are engaged in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where every single particle in our body, where every single cell, where every single limb of ours is turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and engaging in that remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is the deepest form of dhikr that Imam, he wants us to create this inside of us, that our hearts have these trees which long for the rain and which gives life, which revives our hearts. And then in the same munajat, Imam, he continues, وَأَخَذَتْ لَوْءَةَ مَحَبَّتَكَ بِمَجَامِعَ قُلُوبِهِمْ. He's saying that make these hearts, make them ache, make them anticipate, make them yearn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love. Let Allah's love, let your love, he's talking to Allah. He's like, let your love come and overtake my heart. Don't allow my heart to be occupied by anything else except your remembrance, except your dhikr. This dua, this supplication is so important for us. And the reason why it's so important for us is because these du'as and this remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's in perfect harmony with our hearts. Never will we have any type of contradiction when we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only key that can fit in our hearts is the key of dhikr, is the key of dua, is the key of ubudiyyah. If we try to put anything else in our hearts, it doesn't mesh properly, it doesn't sit down, it doesn't settle properly. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He created human beings, He knows what the human beings need in order to reach salvation. He knows what the human beings need in order to become tranquil, in order to have serenity in their lives. He knows, and so he says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub." That your hearts, the only way your hearts become serene, the only way your hearts become at peace is by the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a beautiful hadith from Imam Sadiq where he says, "Al-qalb haramullah." Saying that this heart of ours is a haram of Allah. It's a sanctuary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا تُسْكِنْهَا غَيْرَ اللَّهِ. Don't allow anyone other than Allah to come and sit in your heart. Make your hearts places where only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's dhikr is taking place. And then Imam he continues in this Munajat al-Arifin. فَهُمْ إِلَىٰ الْأَوْكَارِ الْأَفْكَارِ يَعْبُونَ. He's saying, make these hearts of ours a place of constant remembrance and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make this heart, the word which is used is awkar. Make it a nest, where a nest is symbolic for life, where a bird comes and settles down and lays its eggs, and more birds are coming from it. He's saying, enliven my heart with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of times what happens to us is that when we come to a certain place, we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we go to school, when we go to work, when we go shopping, we forget about the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what is the Imam saying? Imam is saying, make my heart a place of constant dhikr, so I don't have to go to any specific place to do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I may have to go to a masjid to do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I may have to sit on a sajjad to do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I may have to go for ziyarah, I may have to go for umrah or hajj, and then I do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Imam is saying what? Imam is saying, make my heart a place of constant dhikr. So no matter wherever I go, my heart is always engaged in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And so this is how the Imam is operating in this environment. He's taking the people and he's reminding them of what their responsibility is. He's taking them and he's reminding them the importance of dhikr. What is the state of our heart? What have we filled our hearts with? Have we filled our hearts with the love of the dunya? Have we filled our hearts with entertainment of the dunya? Or have we filled our hearts with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And this is perhaps one of the greatest lessons we can learn from Imam Sajjad, that we take care of our hearts. Because our hearts are a very precious asset that we have. If we don't take care of our hearts, it leads to a lot of problems, even our physical hearts. But more so, our spiritual hearts, it's important that we only put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts. And so Imam, he's raising people's awareness. And so we find these du'as which are there, brothers and sisters, and we need to read these du'as because they give life to our hearts. See, everybody has a different personality. So these du'as, the multitude of these du'as, they're meant for you to go and read and reflect over them and see which du'as match with you. I remember one of my teachers, he was saying that, there's a tradition that we have that on the day of Arafah, the Imam Hassan went to Hajj and Imam Husayn went to Hajj. Both of these two Imams went to Hajj. And on the day of Arafah, Imam Hassan had a group. He had a group of people who were sitting with him. And they were doing amal and ibadat with Imam Hassan. And then there was another group, which was with Imam Husayn, another group of people. The group that was with Imam Hassan, they're doing the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're in a state of joy, they're in a state of happiness. They're smiling, they're joking around, they're in a state of ecstasy. Right? And in another group where Imam Husayn is in, there's this group of people, there's this group of followers. What are they doing? They're crying, they're weeping, tears are coming from their eyes. They're raising their hands, they're crying with the loudest of their voices. They're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with tears. Right? What this shows for us is that our spiritual state, it always fluctuates. Sometimes we want to laugh with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes we want to cry in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What things are supposed to induce that type of state? It is these du'as. And the only way we can understand which du'as are relevant for us is by reading these types of du'as. See which of these du'as, they appeal to you. Sometimes you may be in a state of sadness, and one du'a may make you, into a state where it takes you out of that state of happiness. Sometimes it may take you out of a state of sadness. Sometimes you feel you're in a state of negativity. These du'as, they are the cure for us. Imam Ali describes the Prophet so beautifully in Najm al-Balagha. He says, "Tabibun dawwarun li-tibbihi." The Prophet, who was he? He was a doctor. Dawwarun li-tibbihi. He used to go around giving people medication for their sickness. What is that medication? it is these du'as, it is these prayers, and these supplications. Salawatu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
And so we find Imam Sajjad doing this. In whatever capacity that he could, he would gather his friends, his neighbors, his family members, and he would recite these du'as in the communal setting. And so when the spies of Bani Marwan, they would come and see, what is he doing? He's not going and he's not trying to overthrow the government or trying to create friction into society. What is he doing? He's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so brothers and sisters, these du'as that we have, they go a very long way in raising our spirituality. They go a very long way in bringing us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a beautiful hadith that we have from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Where he says, "Man lam yakun aqluhu akmala ma fihi kana halakuhu min aysir ma fihi." Imam, in this beautiful hadith, he says the most complete thing within us, it should be our intellect. If we do not approach our religion in an intellectual manner, if we do not approach our religion in a rational manner, the Imam says, in such a person, they will completely perish. They will lose their religion. They're in danger of destruction. One of the things that these du'as they do is that they induce this state within us where we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on an intellectual manner. But it takes it further. It brings it further by creating this spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of times we find that, especially our young people, they get exposed to these different forms of intellectual ideas, especially when they go to university. They go to university, they hear these nice terms, they hear spiritual but not religious, they believe, all these different ideas which are there, right? And so what's happening is the level of the intellect goes down. And when the level of intellect goes down, especially when it comes to religion, the quality of religion, it also goes down. Whereas Imam is saying, if you're able to strengthen your religion with your intellect, then whatever shubahat, whatever misconceptions, whatever wrong ideas come, your faith will never shake. When I was studying in university, I had taken a philosophy class, and the professor who was there, he was an atheist, and in a very eloquent manner, in a very beautiful manner, he would always used to push this atheistic ideas and agenda which he had. So he came and he presented this experiment that took place. It happened in 2006. And in this experiment, what they did was they took about 1,800 people and they put them into 3 different groups. And they told the first group of people that you may receive prayers. So this experiment, what it was trying to do, was it was trying to see what is the receptiveness of prayers. These du'as that we do, are they having any effect? Are they creating any type of change? Or are we doing this aimlessly, haphazardly, carelessly? The people who did this experiment, obviously they had false ideas, so they wanted to show that prayer has no effect. And so in this experiment, what they did was they said, okay, we're going to show that prayer has no effect. So they took about 1,800 people, they put them into 3 different groups. And the first group, they told them that you may receive prayers, and the second group of people, they told them that you also may receive prayers. The first group of people, they did receive prayers, whereas the second group of people, they didn't receive prayers. The third group of people, about 600 patients, they told them that you are going to receive prayers. And they did receive prayers. Then they went to a local Christian church. They gave them pictures of all the patients. They gave them names of all the patients who were sick. And they said to the Christian congregants that we want you to pray for these people. And so, what were the results? The results were that group 1 and 2, they had about 51% complications. Whereas group 3, the group that was given prayers, they were given pictures and they were given the names of those who were sick, about 60% of them had complications. So then they took this experiment and said, well, what is the purpose of your prayers? Your prayers didn't do anything. The group number 3, they were told they received prayers, and they actually did receive prayers, but the results of the experiment, they show what? That they had the most number of complications. So this prayer, this dua, this supplication, what are you doing it for? It's completely ineffective. It's not causing any type of change. So these are strategies that they use in order to dissuade people and to pull people away from religion. So what I want to do is let's look at this argument a little bit. Let's see how do we respond to it. And we'll see most of these ideas that people, they try to present in an intellectual manner, it's filled with fallacies. It's actually what they're doing right here. It's called a straw man fallacy. A straw man fallacy is an error in logic, and what they do is they take a certain concept, right? And they take a certain concept and they frame it in a way that they want, and then they present it. And then they disprove it and say you're wrong. Right? So for example, like a simple example, right? So they say, show for me example, where do sharks exist? So they say, okay, they bring you to the desert and say, well, where does a shark exist? Do you find a shark here? If you look for 1,000 years, you're never going to find a shark in the desert. What are they doing? They're taking a religious concept, they're framing it in a way that they like, and they're presenting it, and they're disproving it, and they're saying, listen, there's no such thing as sharks. They're the same thing that they're doing here. They're coming to religion, they're taking this concept of prayer, supplication, du'as, they're framing it in the way that they want, and they disprove it, and say, well, listen, there's no such thing as God, there's no such thing as prayers, there's no such thing as metaphysics, everything is all physical and material. What is it? So let's look at this idea a little bit more, especially when it comes in the context of dua. See, when we look at what is the purpose of dua, the purpose of dua is not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers our prayers. The mistake that they're doing, the error, the fallacy that they're doing, is saying that dua means that Allah must answer your prayers. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not obliged to answer any of our prayers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy, answers some of our prayers, but He's not in any way obliged. If Allah doesn't answer His prayers, it doesn't mean that He doesn't exist. And one of my teachers, he gave a beautiful example. He said, in front of us, all of us in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are all beggars. Right? We don't own anything. We have no ownership in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever we have, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you walk the street and there's a beggar there, and you go and you give $5 to the beggar, does the beggar have a right to say to you, why did you give me $5? I want you to give me $10. If someone does that to you, what are you going to do? Say, give me my $5 back. Who are you to tell me to give you more money? You're not in any way obliged to give that person anything. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not obliged to give us anything. Whatever He gives to us is out of His mercy. The purpose of dua is not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers whatever we demand from Him. And if He doesn't answer, then it doesn't mean that He doesn't exist. The philosophy of dua is something else. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ud'uni astajib lakum." Call upon me and I will hear you. The purpose of dua, brothers and sisters, is that it's not so that our requests are fulfilled with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The purpose of dua is that we come into a state where we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We come into a state where we take everything else out of our hearts and we put the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts. Yes, sometimes we're in some difficulty. Sometimes we're in some hardship. And those hardships, what do? They propel us to go and do dua. But the purpose of dua is what? To bring the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts. Not that our dua becomes answered. The purpose of dua is to bring us into the state where we only think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we forget about everything else, and the only thing which is in our hearts is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a very special state when we can take everything else out of our hearts and only remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a beautiful story that Allama Amin, one of our scholars, he wrote this, probably 20-volume book called Al-Khadir. And what he did was, he spent years and years traveling all over the Muslim world to go and establish the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So he went to Egypt, North Africa, Morocco. He went to all these different countries. He went to India. He went to, all over the Muslim world. And then he compiled this, masterpiece and brings all different types of evidence why Imam Ali has the wilayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when he completed this work, somebody came to him and they asked him that, can you write a book or can you explain to us about how your trips were when you went there, when you went to India? How was the weather? What type of food did the people eat? When they asked Allama Amini, he said, I have no idea. He said, because my mind was so occupied with just writing this book, nothing else mattered. The purpose of dua is similar like this. We take everything else out of our hearts and our attention is only about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the purpose of dua, to bring that presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts. When we do dua, we want to melt ourselves into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to become one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to acknowledge in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are nothing. And that you are the one who is alive. You are the one who is living. Whatever we have, it comes from you. If you choose to give, we'll take. If you choose not to give, that is your decision. So the purpose of dua is this, brothers and sisters, is that we have this feeling within our hearts that we are completely insignificant, that we are completely powerless, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one with all power and all supremacy. The purpose of dua is to instill this state within us, that we are insignificant creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah we depend on you completely, and we have no role, nor do we have one say. There's a beautiful example that some of our ulama they give to understand our relationship between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the purpose of dua. Of course, without tashbih, without any comparison. Take the example of the sun and the ray, right? The sun, the ray extends from the sun. The moment that the sun stops shining, the ray it ceases to exist. Our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like that. And dua is meant to remind us of this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we are insignificant, that we are nothing without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is echoed in verses of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas, antumul fuqara'u ilallah. That all mankind, all of you are destitute in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of you are insignificant creatures. All of you are nothing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu al-Ghani al-Hamid. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all praiseworthy, is the all sufficient. But the question, inshallah, which I'll end with, is why is it that sometimes our du'as, they aren't accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Sometimes we may ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for some things, but those du'as aren't accepted. See, for any dua to be accepted, there have to be material causes, and there also have to be metaphysical causes which are not physical. So, for example, some material causes. If I'm feeling hungry, the only way that the hunger will be taken out of me is if I go and I eat food, right? If I do dua for hours and hours, the hunger is going to remain within me. But in order for that hunger to be taken out, I need to go and engage in a material cause. But sometimes there's metaphysical causes, right? For example, friendship. For example, love between family members. The way that love is introduced in the family. The way that strong bonds are introduced in the family, it happens through metaphysical causes. No matter how many material causes you put in there, it's not going to happen. It's purely metaphysical cause. The same thing when it comes to disease, when it comes to sickness. Sicknesses and illnesses, they require both material causes, meaning they require the medicine, but they also require metaphysical causes. Well, one of those metaphysical causes are dua, or supplication. Yes, sometimes that person can be healed without metaphysical causes, but they're not able to take the fullest effect of that. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts us through sickness so that we go and we get the material causes. But the main reason that He wanted us to go through that sickness is so that we can go and connect with Him. And then sometimes those conditions for those du'as to be accepted, they're not there. One of the conditions for dua is ikhlas, is sincerity. Right? When do we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after we exhaust everything else. And then we have no other solution, so what do? We turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not a sign of sincerity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to pray. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to give charity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to do certain things. We don't do those things. Rather, what do? We disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We break the covenant that we have with Him. And so what happens is that there's a lack of sincerity on our part. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there's conditions. If these conditions are there, I'll fulfill your dua. I'll fulfill your supplication. Whatever you ask for me, I'll fulfill it for you. But be sincere. Do your duty. Carry out your responsibility, and I will do my responsibility. The Quran says so beautifully, Awfu bi ahdi, talking to humans, mankind. Follow through, be loyal to my covenant. Wa ufi bi ahdikum, and I will listen to you. I'll fulfill that which you ask from me. If we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with sincerity, no doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer our du'as. It's a beautiful story that during the time of Nabi Musa was invited to a wedding, and he attended a wedding function. And as he was leaving the house, he saw Angel Israel sitting on the roof of the house. And he turned to Israel and he said that, why is it that you're standing here? This couple, they just got married. Why is it that you're here? So he says that Allah has decreed that on this night I take both of your souls, that both of them should die on this night. So Nabi Musa, when he heard this, became a bit saddened. They were religious people, practicing people. Why is it that such a young couple, that their lives are going to be ended at such a young age? So Musa was saddened, but he went home because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree that it's meant to happen. The next morning he comes and he says, well, I saw Angel Israel and he said that he was taking their souls, so I should go there so I can go read namaz janazah. So the next morning he goes to their home, and when he goes to their home he sees that there's no signs of sadness, there's no signs of anything which is happening over there. So then he went and he knocked on the door, and the person who was there, the groom, he sees the Prophet and he's surprised, and Musa looks at him and Musa is surprised. So then Nabi Musa says to him that, what did you do last night? You must have done something. And so this groom, he narrates that last night after all of the guests they left, somebody came to our door and they knocked. And they knocked on our door and it turned out to be some needy people. And they said there was a husband and a wife. And the husband had come by himself. And so the husband had said that we're traveling 3 days because we heard that there was a wedding here. And so we wanted to come here and see if there was some extra food. And if there was extra food, we wanted to ask you if you can give it to us and we can fill our stomachs. So the groom, he went inside and he saw that there were 2 portions of food that were made. One for him and one for his wife. So he takes his own portion and he goes and he gives it to the person at the door. And so he gives it to the person accepts it, says thank you. And he asks him, well, do you have a little more food? My wife, she's standing outside of the city. She was tired, she wasn't able to come. And so this person, it's his first night of marriage. So he cannot give his wife's portion of food. But his wife was listening. So then his wife came to the door and she said, yes, take my portion of the food. And so whatever food that they had, they gave it to this needy person. And this person who was there, with sincerity, he raises his hands, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this couple which has given me this type of food, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lengthen their lives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not show them any form of calamity. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the company of the Prophet. And so so they went inside the house. And they went inside the house and they were in the room, the wife was in the room, and she was moving something. And when she was moving something heavy, it fell down. And when it fell down, there was a snake there, and it crushed the snake. And so they realized at that moment that the snake was a poisonous snake, and had this person not come to the door asking for food, then they would have both died on that night. So the rest of the night they spent in worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because this person's dua was accepted, for them to have long, lengthy lives, for them to not see any form of calamity. And so the groom, he was thinking, that when is the third dua of this person going to be accepted, to have the companionship of the prophets? And then I saw you come here in the morning, and now you're our guest. So one of the conditions for dua to be accepted, brothers and sisters, is sincerity. When we don't have sincerity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to answer our du'as. And another condition for our du'as to be accepted is that it has to be in accordance with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom doesn't dictate that such a thing should happen, if this dua is fulfilled, and it's going to cause harm for you, then such a thing, it won't happen. Sometimes we ask Allah for certain things, but we don't know what the repercussions of those things are. Sometimes they may be damaging to us. Sometimes they may be detrimental for us. Sometimes they may be harmful for us. So whenever we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if His hikmah is there, then for surely it will happen. But if we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His hikmah is not associated with it, His hikmah is not affiliated with it, then such a thing, it won't happen. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves His servants. So He's never going to fulfill a dua for them, which is going to cause harm to them, which is going to be detrimental for them. So brothers and sisters, these are the nights in which we get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the nights in which we engage in prayer, in worship, in du'as. It's important for us to be reminded that when we do these du'as, it's to revive our hearts, to bring the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not a transactional relationship where we do something for Him and He does something for us. No, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes far deeper than this. On this night, and I recommend you and I recommend myself, that these books of du'as that we have, especially Sayyid Sajjad, make it a part of your daily lives. Read these du'as as much as you can. You'll see that your spirituality will soar up high. You'll see that those mental difficulties, you'll see sometimes those states of sadness and depression and unhappiness will completely disappear. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this very auspicious night, on this very sacred night, بحق Imam al-Sajjad, that he accepts all of our du'as. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, بحق Imam al-Sajjad, that all of those who are sick, all of those who are ill, all of those who are in need of shifa, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our hearts a sanctuary which is in the constant remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the dhuhur of our Imam, our Master, our Sayyid, and to make us among his supporters and followers, inshallah. I'd like to also thank the community for accepting me these last few nights. It's truly been an honor for me to be here. I apologize, my voice has not been helping me too much, but inshallah, next week I'm going for ziyarah. Your community, your family, all the members are in my dua, inshallah. 15th Shaban, I hope to be in Karbala. So I will do dua for you. I will do that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do dua that Allah protects you and keeps you safe from all difficulty and all hardship, inshallah. And I ask you to also please remember me in your duas and prayers as well, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.